What if the most sacred place tied to Princess Diana was secretly used for a photo shoot? In a shocking twist that's left royal insiders stunned, Meghan Markle and Prince Harry are accused of staging a hidden tribute at Diana's gravesite without telling her family. The alleged footage was quietly leaked to a U.S. outlet, triggering outrage from Earl Spencer, Diana's brother, who called it a desecration of sacred space. Now, in a move no one saw coming, he's reportedly taken the ultimate step, stripping Archie and Lilibet of their rights to the Spencer inheritance. What really happened behind the scenes at Althorpe? And how did a private visit become a global scandal? Stay tuned. We're diving deep into the betrayal, the fallout, and what it means for Diana's legacy. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Under the gray skies of Northamptonshire, a figure dressed in black stood motionless before a simple island grave. The winds moved through the tall oaks surrounding the lake at Althorpe House, brushing across the memorial of the most adored woman in modern royal history, Princess Diana. The scene should have been solemn, quiet, private, but what followed next would ignite a storm of controversy that would shake the Spencer bloodline to its core and, for the first time, result in the formal rejection of two royal children from a centuries-old noble inheritance. On that fateful morning, Meghan Markle and Prince Harry reportedly arranged a discreet visit to Diana's burial site. At least, that was the narrative they circulated afterward. A private tribute, they claimed. A daughter-in-law showing reverence to the late Princess of Wales. Yet, within days, images emerged in a glossy American magazine. Images that seemed too well-framed, too perfectly lit, and too conveniently released to be spontaneous. The shots depicted Meghan in a somber pose near the lake, a camera zooming from behind the trees. In another, she gently placed flowers at the edge of the memorial island, her gaze cast downward. There were no visible security personnel, no family members, and, most crucially, no prior communication with Earl Spencer, Diana's brother and custodian of Althorpe. For Charles Spencer, this was not just an intrusion, it was a line crossed. What was meant to be a sacred space for remembrance had, in his eyes, been reduced to a photo backdrop. A gravesite exploited for global headlines. What followed was not merely a complaint or a quiet rebuke behind palace walls. It was a decisive act of vengeance wrapped in the language of legacy, honor, and irreversible consequence. In a private legal move, Spencer reportedly took the ultimate step, barring Meghan and Harry's children. Archie Harrison and Lilibet Diana from all Spencer inheritance claims, ancestral privileges, and familial legal rights. To understand the magnitude of this move, one must appreciate the gravity of what Althorpe represents. Unlike the castles of Windsor or the marble chambers of Buckingham Palace, Althorpe is not simply a residence. It is the root from which Diana's legacy was born. For Earl Spencer, his sister's legacy is not an abstract idea. It is a responsibility he has carried for more than 2 decades. He's protected her memory with fierce resolve, including through public speeches that thundered against the press after her death, and through careful curations of her memory at Althorpe, which he opens to the public every year on the anniversary of her passing. The estate is a temple of memory, not a stage for celebrity. But this incident, according to those close to the matter, changed everything. The alleged secret photoshoot was not merely distasteful. It was, in Earl Spencer's words to a confidant, a desecration of sacred ground. Reports suggest that Charles Spencer first heard about the visit from a staff member at the estate, who noticed unrecognized camera crew movement along the perimeter and expressed concerns. By the time the images were published in the U.S., the damage was done. What was framed as an innocent act of grief, Spencer saw as calculated manipulation of Diana's grave for headlines, reputation laundering, and global sympathy. This event raises questions far deeper than tabloid gossip or family quarrels. What do we make of a world where even memorials can be turned into content? Where celebrity intersects with nobility and grief becomes a commodity? And more urgently, how should families protect sacred memory from becoming weaponized in an age of 24-hour narrative control? Sources close to Althorpe Estate say the reaction inside the Spencer family was one of utter betrayal. It wasn't just the act. It was the premeditation. The calculated use of an emotionally charged site, the failure to communicate with Diana's only brother, and the subsequent publication of the photos under the guise of privacy felt like an attack on every value Earl Spencer holds dear. And while Prince Harry may have once walked that same path to mourn his mother, the context this time was different. The symbolism of Meghan and Harry bringing cameras, allegedly without consent, spoke volumes about the shifting purpose of their visits to Diana's memory. Yet the ramifications didn't stop at private outrage. Behind closed doors, legal advisors were consulted. Inheritance frameworks were revisited. And within months, a confidential decision had been made. Archie and Lilibet would no longer be part of the Spencer line. Though these children shared Diana's blood, they would be excluded from titles, assets, and all estate benefits tied to Althorpe. It was a brutal measure, not aimed at the children themselves, but as a consequence of the actions of their parents. This decision struck a deep nerve among royal watchers and historians alike. Could a family really erase its own lineage? Was this act of removal a statement of moral defiance or a form of legacy revenge? And why now, after years of quiet tolerance, did Earl Spencer finally act? Insiders believe it wasn't just this visit. It was a cumulative reaction to years of what he saw as the commercialization of Diana's image. From Netflix deals to best-selling memoirs, every moment seemed to leverage her memory. For Earl Spencer, the gravesite visit was the final straw, a symbolic violation that demanded a symbolic punishment. As word of the inheritance block leaked into high society circles, reactions were swift and divided. Supporters of Earl Spencer praised him for drawing a line in the sand, defending the sanctity of Diana's memory from being used as brand equity. Critics, however, claimed the children should not suffer for the sins of their parents, questioning whether it was fair or even legal to revoke their place in the Spencer legacy. Still others speculated that this was Earl Spencer's discreet way of warning Harry, protect what little bridge remains, or watch it all collapse. Meanwhile, Meghan and Harry's team remained silent on the specifics. There was no public statement, no denial, no acknowledgement of the leaked photo shoot or the inheritance snub. But whispers from Montecito insiders suggest that the couple was blindsided by the reaction. Meghan reportedly believed the visit was a personal, respectful act, and is said to have been devastated when she learned of Spencer's fury. The drama also further strained relations between Harry and his extended family. Sources close to Prince William say he supported Spencer's outrage, seeing it as a long overdue response to what he too viewed as exploitative behavior. William, unlike Harry, maintains regular communication with Earl Spencer, and insiders say the two men privately agreed that Diana's legacy must be shielded, even from her own descendants if necessary. From a legal standpoint, the Spencer inheritance exclusion is airtight. British inheritance law allows for vast discretion in estate allocation, especially in noble families with intergenerational trusts. Earl Spencer, as the ninth Earl, holds stewardship over Althorpe's future, and he acted well within his rights. But legally right does not always mean morally clear, and that gray zone is where public fascination now rests. What happens next is uncertain. Will Meghan and Harry challenge the decision legally or attempt a private reconciliation? Will Archie and Lilibet grow up knowing they were barred from their grandmother's legacy? And more pressingly, what does this say about the nature of family, loyalty, and control in today's royal narrative landscape? As this story unfolds, the world watches not just a family dispute, but a battle over memory, dignity, and identity. In one corner stands Earl Spencer, the stoic guardian of Diana's resting place. In the other, the self-exiled couple whose fame continues to polarize the globe. At the center, two innocent children whose birthrights were rewritten by a single act caught on camera. Let this be the lens through which we explore not just scandal, but the soul of legacy itself. In the vast tapestry of British nobility, few families hold a legacy as storied, as tragic, and as fiercely protected as the Spencers. Long before the winds of scandal began to circle around Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, and long before the cameras rolled across Althorpe's serene landscape, the Spencer name was already etched into the chronicles of British history, not just for its peerage, but for its solemn inheritance of duty, grief, and pride. At the very heart of this legacy stands Charles Edward Maurice Spencer, the ninth Earl Spencer, a man shaped not just by lineage, but by pain. And at the center of that pain is the eternal shadow of his sister, Diana, Princess of Wales. To understand why Earl Spencer's reaction to Meghan's alleged actions was so fierce, and why he would take the unprecedented step of formally excluding Archie and Lilibet from the Spencer inheritance, we must first understand what the Spencer inheritance truly represents. This is not a matter of just money or land. It is about identity. It is about honor. It is about protecting something that has already been violated by the world far too many times. The Spencer family dates back to the 15th century. They were originally wealthy sheep farmers who rose in influence and respect through their loyalty to the crown and their strategic marriages. Over the centuries, the family accumulated not just land and power, but a reputation for independence, intellectualism, and moral clarity. Their ancestral seat, Althorp House, is a sprawling estate in Northamptonshire with over 500 years of heritage embedded in its stone walls. This was not simply where Diana grew up. It was where she learned grace, empathy, and the pain of neglect, a place that would later become her final resting ground, away from the turmoil of the crown. Charles Spencer was born into this world of solemn prestige and duty. As a child, he watched his sister navigate a fractured family and a broken marriage. As a young man, he became the custodian of her truth. When Diana died tragically in that Paris car crash in 1997, it was Charles's eulogy, delivered with thunder and heartbreak at Westminster Abbey, that echoed around the world. He promised the world that Diana's blood family would guard her legacy. He spoke not as a nobleman, but as a brother. Furious, grieving, and resolute. That vow has shaped every decision he has made since. For Charles Spencer, Diana's story didn't end with her funeral. It became a lifelong mission to shield her dignity, her children, and her memory from exploitation. That's why Althorp's gates remain closed most of the year. That's why Diana was buried on a private island, surrounded by trees, with no camera access and minimal public view. That's why any act that trespasses upon this legacy, particularly for profit or image, is seen as an attack on everything she stood for. The Spencer inheritance, therefore, is not merely about titles or real estate. It is a torch passed from one generation to the next. It includes ancestral lands, historic documents, priceless art, and private family trusts. But perhaps its greatest value is intangible, an expectation that its heirs will uphold the family's dignity. Traditionally, this inheritance would extend to the male line of descent, including nephews and nieces, especially those bearing the family name in part or blood. In this case, Archie Harrison and Lilibet Diana are direct biological descendants of Diana, making them natural heirs to the Spencer legacy, at least in theory. But something has shifted. In the years since Harry's exit from royal duties and the couple's relocation to America, Earl Spencer has reportedly grown increasingly disillusioned with the way Diana's memory has been used by Harry, by Meghan, and by the media machine that surrounds them. Each interview, each docuseries, each public reference to Diana seems to reopen the wound of 1997. Yet none of those moments hit as hard as the alleged secret photo shoot at Althorp. Earl Spencer had drawn his line in the sand. This was not just about disrespect, it was about betrayal. And that betrayal, in his view, came not from strangers, but from within his own bloodline. Harry, who once walked behind his mother's coffin in sorrow, now appeared to be part of a coordinated media effort to use her gravesite for emotional optics. And Meghan, who never knew Diana personally, seemed to be co-opting her legacy for American consumption. In Earl Spencer's eyes, this was not just opportunism, it was desecration. So he acted. With the weight of history and legal precedent on his side, he convened legal counsel and restructured key portions of the Spencer family trusts. This included clauses specifying eligibility for inclusion in the inheritance based on behavior, values, and stewardship of the family's legacy. In doing so, he made a clear distinction. Biological relation alone would no longer guarantee access to the Spencer inheritance. It had to be earned. And in the wake of the Althorp controversy, Archie and Lilibet were formally removed. Some may see this as harsh. After all, Archie and Lilibet are children. Innocent, unknowing, unchosen participants in the choices of their parents. But to Earl Spencer, this was not about punishment. It was about preservation. A family legacy, especially one so deeply tied to grief and public betrayal, must be guarded with vigilance. If Meghan and Harry were willing to cross the line so brazenly, what message would it send to let their children inherit the very legacy their parents had, allegedly, exploited? This move also carries significant symbolic weight in British aristocratic culture. Inheritance is not merely transactional, it is ceremonial. It defines status, belonging, and future obligations. By removing Archie and Lilibet, Earl Spencer did more than cut them out of a will. He cut them out of the story. Some close to the Spencer circle have described this as Charles Spencer's most painful decision since Diana's death. For all his frustration with Meghan and Harry, he reportedly held hopes that the children could one day reconnect with the family on their own terms, perhaps as teenagers or adults seeking truth. But this incident forced a premature reckoning. It demanded action now, before further damage could be done. Still, others in aristocratic circles have privately questioned whether this move was too extreme. After all, isn't inheritance a means of unity, not exclusion? And won't this only deepen the divide between the two royal camps already at odds? But those who know Charles Spencer best say this was not a decision made in haste. It was the culmination of years of silent frustration, punctuated by a final, unforgivable event. And in the private corridors of Althorpe, where Diana's spirit is said to linger in the quiet winds across the lake, the Earl made peace with his choice. Publicly, Charles Spencer has remained measured in his comments. He has not issued a scathing press release or gone on television to explain himself. He simply acted, letting the legal documents speak for him. And perhaps that's what makes this move so powerful. It wasn't performative. It was permanent. In British noble culture, silence carries weight. Action carries finality. And inheritance, once revoked, sends a message louder than any statement ever could. As this story unfolds, it is not just about one man's decision or one family's rift. It is about the invisible threads that tie legacy to behavior, remembrance to reputation, and family to principle. The Spencer legacy may no longer include Harry's children, but it will always include Diana. And perhaps, in the mind of Earl Spencer, that is what matters most. From the moment Meghan Markle entered the public consciousness as Prince Harry's then-girlfriend, she demonstrated a keen understanding of media optics. Her experience as a working actress in Hollywood had already shaped her approach to public image, calculated, curated, and carefully controlled. In the entertainment industry, reputation is both armor and currency. So when Meghan transitioned from the world of scripted drama into the unpredictable theater of royal life, she brought with her a media playbook designed not just to survive scrutiny, but to redirect, refocus, and redefine it. This playbook, according to insiders and critics alike, was on full display during the infamous Diana graveside incident, a maneuver seen not as a gesture of mourning but as another move in a larger, long-standing strategy of narrative control. Before Meghan met Harry, she had already cultivated a public persona as an articulate, charitable, and socially conscious actress. She ran a lifestyle blog called The Tig, modeled after celebrity wellness brands, and had begun aligning herself with gender equality campaigns and charitable causes. On the surface, these actions painted a picture of a humanitarian in the making. But even back then, those in the industry noted her acute awareness of optics. Everything, from wardrobe choices to partnerships, appeared designed to build a brand image that could transition seamlessly into global influence. That media sensibility only sharpened once Meghan stepped into the royal spotlight. The British press was relentless, and Meghan responded with a strategy rarely seen from within the royal family: counter-narrative dominance. Rather than let the tabloids define her, Meghan began shaping her own media coverage through selective interviews, strategic leaks, and curated public appearances. One key example was the now famous interview with Vanity Fair in 2017, where she coyly declared, "We're in love," effectively confirming her relationship with Harry on her own terms, an unprecedented move in royal dating history. It became increasingly clear that Meghan viewed the media not as an enemy to be avoided, but as a tool to be wielded. After their royal wedding in 2018, the Sussexes began deviating from traditional palace communications, choosing instead to announce key decisions through non-traditional channels. When they stepped down from royal duties in 2020, they broke the news on Instagram, bypassing the Queen's office entirely. And shortly after, they began making headlines not through palace events, but through appearances on platforms like Oprah, Netflix, Spotify, and their Archwell Foundation press releases. This shift did not occur in a vacuum. Harry, once known for his intense disdain of the media, particularly for its role in his mother's death, appeared to have pivoted alongside Meghan. Together, they adopted a modern public relations model. If you cannot control the press, drown it out with your own version of events. The problem, critics argue, is that this strategy often relied on emotionally loaded narratives, vague accusations. This shift did not occur in a vacuum. Harry, once known for his intense disdain of the media, particularly for its role in his mother's death, appeared to have pivoted alongside Meghan. Together, they adopted a modern public relations model. If you cannot control the press, drown it out with your own version of events. The problem, critics argue, is that this strategy often relied on emotionally loaded narratives, vague accusations, and heavily produced content that raised more questions than answers. The Oprah Winfrey interview in March 2021 stands as a textbook example of the Sussex media playbook. Framed as a tell-all, the interview aired unchallenged claims about royal racism, mental health neglect, and emotional distress. The format, glossy, pre-recorded, and one-sided, offered no opportunity for rebuttal from the accused parties. It was storytelling through the lens of victimhood and moral high ground, carefully presented to a sympathetic American audience. In the wake of that interview, support for Meghan and Harry surged in certain circles, especially among American celebrities and media commentators. But in the UK, the backlash was swift and sharp. Many felt betrayed by the couple's public airing of family disputes, especially when those disputes involved figures like the late Prince Philip, who was hospitalized at the time. Yet even this backlash served a purpose. It reinforced the couple's narrative, embattled truth-tellers standing up against an archaic and unfeeling institution. This narrative control extended into every major project the Sussexes undertook. Their Netflix docuseries, Harry and Meghan, was less a documentary and more a multi-hour visual memoir, produced with the intimacy and emotional pull of reality television, yet structured to emphasize the righteousness of their cause. It presented them as misunderstood champions of change, fighting against invisible enemies within the monarchy. Every anecdote, image, and emotional beat was chosen for maximum sympathy and impact. The Diana gravesite incident, then, must be viewed through this broader lens. To outside observers unfamiliar with the couple's pattern, a visit to Diana's grave may appear solemn or touching. But to those who have studied the Sussex media strategy, the timing, framing, and release of the visit's imagery suggest more than just coincidence. The photos published by an American media outlet days after the visit raised immediate questions. Who took them? How did they get past the secluded and heavily restricted Althorpe grounds? Why were they released to a U.S. outlet rather than through a family-approved channel? Why were the images professionally framed, clearly staged to evoke maximum emotion? And why were there no other family members, no Spencer representation, and no prior announcement to Earl Spencer? These are not small questions. In the world of legacy management, especially regarding someone as revered as Princess Diana, every public act carries consequence. For Earl Spencer, this visit was not a personal moment of mourning. It was a performance, one that borrowed from the playbook he had watched unfold over the past several years. A playbook that, in his eyes, cheapened private grief into content creation. Moreover, this move followed a pattern. In 2022, Meghan made headlines for visiting the site of the Uvalde school shooting in Texas. Though she had no official role, she appeared on the ground, placing flowers and wearing a baseball cap pulled low. The visit, widely covered by U.S. press, was described as personal, but photos were quickly circulated. Critics questioned whether it was a sincere gesture or a strategic PR moment. This approach to public grief, visiting tragic sites, aligning with emotional narratives, appearing silently empathetic, has become a recognizable tactic. The goal seems to be to occupy emotional space without needing to answer hard questions. And when that strategy was applied to Diana's resting place, it crossed a line that Earl Spencer could not forgive. For many in the media and public, Meghan's understanding of optics is both her strength and her flaw. She knows how to command attention, craft messages, and shape stories. But when that skill set is used in deeply personal or sacred spaces, it risks coming off as manipulative rather than meaningful. That is the crux of the criticism: sincerity versus spectacle. If Meghan had genuinely intended the gravesite visit to be private, why allow, or arrange, photographers to be present? Why release the photos? Why not inform Diana's own brother? In Earl Spencer's mind, there was only one answer. It was never meant to be private at all. Instead, it was another chapter in a long-running campaign of brand building. Using emotional resonance to reinforce the Sussex image of righteous rebellion, painful exile, and generational victimhood. But Diana's legacy, to Spencer, is not a tool to be repurposed. It is a wound still healing, a memory held in trust. And that trust, in his eyes, was violated. In essence, Meghan's media playbook may work wonders in American celebrity culture. It may earn praise from progressive magazines and late-night hosts. It may even resonate with audiences who view monarchy with suspicion. But within the guarded world of British aristocracy, where restraint, honor, and legacy matter far more than visibility, it comes across as disruptive at best and disgraceful at worst. This divide between the Hollywood model of narrative creation and the British model of institutional memory is what ultimately placed Meghan and Harry on a collision course with the Spencer family. And in the moment they turned Diana's grave into a stage, that collision became irreversible. It was early spring in Northamptonshire when the Sussexes arrived under the cloak of secrecy. No public announcements were made. No palace press releases. No Spencer family coordination. Yet within days, images emerged that contradicted the narrative of a quiet, private tribute. The couple, dressed in subdued, camera-ready attire, were photographed solemnly approaching the edge of the lake at Althorpe, the final resting place of Princess Diana. But this wasn't just any visit. This was a moment captured, curated, and leaked in a way that suggested not remembrance, but presentation. And that single decision, to stage and distribute a visit to Diana's gravesite, would ignite a firestorm across Britain and within the very heart of the Spencer lineage. The Althorpe estate, home to the Spencer family for over 5 centuries, is not a public park. Though open to visitors on specific days during summer, its most sacred site, the island burial of Diana, is permanently off-limits. Surrounded by water and hidden from view, the gravesite was designed for reflection, not spectacle. And any access to it must pass through the direct authority of Earl Spencer, Diana's younger brother and the legal steward of the estate. For Meghan and Harry to access that space without Spencer's prior knowledge was not just a breach of protocol. It was a symbolic violation of private mourning. According to insiders at Althorpe, the estate was caught completely off guard. Staff on site reported seeing unfamiliar vehicles approach a rarely used path leading toward the lake. Within minutes, a small team disembarked, including what appeared to be a photographer or videographer holding professional equipment. While the identities of the visitors were not immediately confirmed, it was only after the images appeared in a US-based magazine that the estate pieced together the sequence. Meghan and Harry had orchestrated an unsanctioned media moment on sacred ground. The photographs themselves were striking. One image showed Meghan standing alone, her hand clutching white lilies, gazing toward the water with an air of reverence. Another captured Harry with his head bowed, a subtle tear trailing down his cheek. The photos were crisp, atmospheric, and perfectly aligned with the couple's public brand, grief-stricken, isolated, and yet dignified in their silent mourning. The problem wasn't the emotion. The problem was the audience. The images were published alongside a brief article in an American entertainment outlet known for celebrity exclusives. The piece claimed the couple had made a surprise visit to Diana's resting place in honor of Mother's Day, framing the trip as a quiet, deeply personal act of homage. But the publication did not mention that the visit was unauthorized, nor did it disclose how the photographer gained access to private Spencer grounds, or who gave consent for the photos to be published. Within hours, online speculation erupted. How did a private visit become international news? Who gave the green light to have it photographed? Why was Earl Spencer not informed, especially when the gravesite is located on land he owns and controls? And perhaps the most damning question of all, was this ever meant to be private in the first place? The answer, many believe, lies in the way the images were staged. Lighting conditions suggest early planning, possibly even scouting beforehand to catch the perfect ambient tone. Wardrobe choices, muted colors, no logos, minimal jewelry, matched the tone of grief but also looked stylistically polished. The framing of the shots, particularly Meghan's solitary pose against the lake's backdrop, felt more editorial than spontaneous. It was, to critics, a scene directed rather than discovered. What angered Earl Spencer most was not just the breach in trust or the unauthorized presence. It was the instrumentalization of Diana's grave used, in his view, not to grieve, but to gain. A close friend of the Spencer family was quoted anonymously as saying Charles Spencer was beyond livid. It wasn't just disrespectful, it was deliberate. That site is sacred. For them to turn it into a photo op without even informing him? It was the final insult. Within royal and aristocratic circles, such conduct is unthinkable. Protocol and communication are sacred pillars of how legacy and respect are maintained. To enter an estate like Althorpe without formal clearance is more than trespassing, it is defiance. But to photograph a gravesite and use those images in global media? That was viewed as desecration. In the weeks following the incident, tension escalated behind the scenes. Earl Spencer, who had long remained silent on Harry and Meghan's many public campaigns, began holding closed-door meetings with family attorneys. Conversations reportedly revolved around how to protect Diana's memory from further exploitation and how to ensure Althorpe remained a place of sanctity, not spectacle. What emerged from those meetings would become a seismic moment in modern aristocratic history, the formal exclusion of Archie and Lilibet from any Spencer inheritance or title. But before that decision was made official, more layers of the visit unraveled. Digital investigators and media watchdogs began analyzing the metadata of the published images. A digital footprint revealed that the photos were not captured by paparazzi hiding in the woods, but by a known celebrity photographer affiliated with a boutique Los Angeles agency. This discovery confirmed what many already suspected. The visit had been planned, organized, and executed like a PR campaign. Critics in the British press did not hold back. Columnists from The Times, The Telegraph, and the Daily Mail all condemned the act as disturbing, narcissistic, and disrespectful to the memory of a woman who fled media obsession in life and was now being used for it in death. Even usually sympathetic voices began to question the Sussexes' judgment. Was the cost of controlling their narrative now so high that no boundary remained sacred? And yet, despite the backlash, no apology was issued. There was no statement of clarification, no attempt to reach out to the Spencer family. The silence from Montecito was interpreted not as damage control, but as defiance. And that silence spoke volumes. Earl Spencer's decision to act wasn't based solely on one visit. It was the culmination of years of tension. But the Althorpe incident marked a turning point. By entering that sacred space without transparency, Meghan and Harry had, in his eyes, broken a covenant. Diana's grave was not a monument to be leveraged. It was a wound to be protected. The gravity of the Spencer inheritance cannot be overstated. It is not just land or money. It is a lineage tied to nobility, stewardship, and deeply rooted responsibilities. By excluding Archie and Lilibet, Spencer wasn't just cutting them off financially. He was rewriting the future of his family. The children, who carry Diana's blood, were now legally and symbolically erased from the ancestral narrative. And it all began with a camera shutter by a lake. What makes this event so difficult to compartmentalize is its moral complexity. On one hand, any child has the right to connect with their lineage, to understand where they come from. On the other, lineage is more than biology, it is about legacy. And legacies must be preserved, not repurposed. The Althorpe visit forced a national conversation about where the line is drawn between remembrance and exploitation. It sparked debates on morning television, editorials in every major paper, and arguments on social media. Some defended Meghan and Harry, arguing that their visit was genuine, that they had every right to mourn in their own way. Others were less forgiving, accusing them of turning Diana's tragedy into a perpetual talking point, one that seemed to benefit them more than honor her. Ultimately, the truth of that day may never be fully known. Only Meghan, Harry, and their team know what was intended, who was contacted, and why the images were released in the manner they were. But for Earl Spencer, the intention no longer mattered. The impact did, and that impact, in his mind, was irreparable. So as the sun sets on Althorpe, and the trees once again sway quietly around the lake, one truth remains. What happened that day was more than a visit. It was a rupture. A moment when the sacred was touched by the spectacle. And from that moment forward, nothing in the Spencer family would ever be the same again. When Earl Spencer received the first phone call about the unsanctioned presence of Harry and Meghan at Althorpe, he didn't immediately react. Those close to him say he stood silent on the other end of the line, the breath leaving his lungs in long, measured pauses. He had heard rumblings before of strange decisions made in Montecito, of theatrical moments designed to provoke attention, but this was different. This wasn't gossip from afar. This was personal. This was about his land, his sister, his promise. And something in him snapped. To outsiders, Charles Spencer may appear as a reserved nobleman, eloquent, poised, restrained. But within those calm eyes resides a man of deep loyalty and sharper memory. The promise he made at Westminster Abbey in 1997, in front of the entire world, was not made lightly. He vowed to protect Diana from those who had failed her in life. That oath didn't end when the cameras were turned off. It followed him into the years of quiet mourning, into his stewardship of Althorpe, and into every decision that touched Diana's legacy. So when images of Meghan Markle at the edge of Diana's gravesite were published internationally, stylized, staged, and offered to the press under the branding of a private visit, Spencer saw it not as tribute, but as betrayal. And for the first time since Diana's death, he would take action not just with words, but with irreversible legal consequence. Multiple sources close to the Earl say the moment he saw the photos, he immediately ordered a full internal review at Althorpe. Who gave access to the Sussexes? Who opened the gates? How were photographers permitted onto the grounds without clearance? What happened to the layers of privacy he had spent decades maintaining around his sister's resting place? The answers came quickly and were deeply unsettling. No formal request had been submitted by Harry or Meghan. No photographer had been given permission. No staff member had been told of a planned visit. In short, it had been an ambush of sacred space. Spencer's private fury began to crystallize into action. The first step was to gather documentation, copies of the images, details of the outlet that published them, metadata from the digital files, and witness statements from estate staff. Every piece of evidence confirmed what he feared. This was not an accidental leak, not a heartfelt visit gone wrong. It was a carefully orchestrated scene with one purpose: publicity. And that was a line he had vowed never to let anyone cross again. His first public response was indirect. During a speech at a private charitable event held weeks later, he made a pointed comment about those who treat sacred spaces as tools for personal elevation, a remark many saw as a veiled reference to the Sussexes. Those who were in the room noted the shift in his voice, the frustration beneath the polished exterior. But the real blow came behind closed doors. With the help of his legal team and trustees, Earl Spencer initiated a quiet but decisive move: the restructuring of the Spencer family inheritance policies. While these matters are typically confidential and handled within the narrow corridors of aristocratic law, sources close to the process confirmed the outcome. Archie Harrison Mountbatten-Windsor and Lilibet Diana Mountbatten-Windsor would be excluded from any present or future claims to the Spencer family estates, trusts, and ancestral privileges. It was a historic and painful move, one that reflected not hatred, but principle. To understand the gravity of such a decision, one must consider British aristocratic culture. Inheritance is not merely financial. It is social, spiritual, and dynastic. It determines access to heritage, legacy, and, in some cases, identity. By formally excluding Harry's children, Spencer effectively cut them off from the part of their heritage tied to Diana's bloodline, at least in any legal or symbolic sense. Privately, Earl Spencer was said to be devastated by the necessity of the move. He had long hoped that, despite the Sussexes' rocky relationship with the royal family, their children might one day reconnect with their roots through Althorpe. He had envisioned Archie and Lilibet visiting the estate as teenagers, perhaps attending family ceremonies and learning about their grandmother's life beyond headlines and documentaries. But the alleged manipulation of her resting place rendered those dreams impossible. It wasn't about punishing children, one close friend of Spencer told a confidential source. It was about protecting Diana's spirit. That's the only thing Charles has ever cared about. Publicly, Earl Spencer remained characteristically silent. He did not comment to the press, issue a statement, or appear on any televised interviews. But his silence carried a message louder than any outrage. Diana's memory was not up for sale, and those who tried to use it as currency would be locked out, no matter how close they stood by blood. The press eventually caught wind of the inheritance exclusion through whispers in legal circles. One British columnist described it as the firmest rejection of Meghan and Harry's tactics by anyone in Diana's family. Another op-ed in a London broadsheet described it as a reckoning long overdue. The public reaction was split. Some hailed Spencer's decision as an act of integrity. Others condemned it as cruel. Supporters of Spencer argued that his action was necessary in an era where public mourning has become a brand strategy. They viewed his rejection of the Sussexes' children not as an attack on them, but as a line drawn against the exploitation of grief. Detractors, on the other hand, claimed that punishing innocent children for the actions of their parents was a form of generational vengeance. But even those critics had difficulty challenging Spencer's core argument. Diana's grave was sacred, and it had been turned into a photo shoot. The emotional toll on Spencer during this period cannot be overstated. Those closest to him noted that he withdrew further into the estate, rarely making public appearances and spending more time alone by the lake that encircles his sister's island. The same lake that, once violated, now felt like a battlefield. He took comfort in the trees planted in Diana's honor, the soft rustle of wind across the water, and the knowledge that he had done everything within his power to protect her again. To the Spencer family, this decision also served as a protective mechanism for the future. By formalizing the inheritance exclusion, Earl Spencer prevented any future claims or lawsuits from emerging as the children aged. It was legal, binding, and final. In doing so, he also sent a signal to others, both within the aristocracy and outside of it, that legacy is not something that can be manipulated by headlines or repackaged into streaming content. There's a symbolic dimension to Spencer's response as well. In stripping Archie and Lilibet of their place within the Spencer narrative, he also removed the last visible tether between Diana's heritage and the Sussex brand. With each televised special and high-profile interview, that brand had grown increasingly dependent on the emotional weight of Diana's story. But with this act, Spencer severed that cord coldly, legally, and publicly. There was no press conference, no rage-filled interview, just an inheritance withdrawn, names removed, and gates quietly closed. As time passed, Meghan and Harry made no public mention of the inheritance exclusion. Perhaps it was too painful. Perhaps it confirmed what they had long feared, that their path had not only distanced them from the crown, but from Diana's legacy itself. Yet, in some ways, that silence said more than words ever could. And Earl Spencer? He continues his guardianship of Althorp. He walks the estate each morning, speaks quietly with the staff, and keeps Diana's resting place as untouched as possible. Every decision he makes is filtered through one question. Would this have protected her? In the end, his reaction to the gravesite scandal was not emotional. It was deeply calculated. And that calculation reflected the deepest truth about Charles Spencer. He does not see himself as a public figure or a commentator. He sees himself as a sentinel, one who guards a grave, a legacy, and a vow. That vow was made 27 years ago beneath the vaulted ceilings of Westminster Abbey. And with the stroke of a pen, on a legal document sealed within the walls of Althorp, he kept it. Inheritance within the British aristocracy is not a simple matter of family affection or public image. It is governed by centuries of tradition, legal frameworks, and deep-rooted expectations. In most noble families, especially those as old and established as the Spencers, inheritance is about more than money. It is about continuity, legacy, identity. It's about who carries the family name forward, who guards the memory of ancestors, and who upholds the values upon which an entire bloodline rests. For Earl Spencer, these values were not abstract, they were personal. And in the wake of what he perceived as the desecration of his sister's resting place, he made the gravest decision a peer of the realm can make, to alter the inheritance structure of the Spencer estate and shut the legal doors on Archie and Lilibet forever. This move was not impulsive. It was methodical, deliberate, and executed in silence through the ancient channels of English aristocratic law. But its impact was seismic. To begin understanding this transformation, we must look at the structure of British noble inheritance. Most aristocratic families, including the Spencers, manage their wealth and properties through dynastic trusts. These trusts are established not just to protect wealth from taxes or outside claims, but to ensure that assets, lands, heirlooms, and symbolic responsibilities are passed on according to long-standing principles. While modern families often rewrite their wills with relative ease, aristocrats must adhere to legally binding instruments often established generations prior. These trusts cannot be modified on a whim. They require cause, legal backing, and careful review by trustees and solicitors. In the case of the Spencer family, multiple trusts manage different parts of the estate. From Althorp House itself to the family's extensive archives, jewelry, and charitable endowments. The Central Trust, created over a century ago, was initially set to prioritize male heirs in accordance with primogeniture customs. But Diana's legacy complicated the inheritance model in ways few had anticipated. As the most globally beloved figure to emerge from the Spencer line in the modern era, her children, particularly Prince William and Prince Harry, stood as the symbolic bridge between the monarchy and the Spencer family. Even though the titles and estates associated with Diana passed through the male Spencer line, there had always been an understanding that her sons, and by extension, their children, would be given some symbolic place in the Spencer family's future. This was especially true for Archie and Lilibet, who represented the next generation of Diana's bloodline. That possibility is now gone. Following the gravesite scandal, Earl Spencer initiated a formal legal process to re-evaluate and restructure elements of the family's inheritance framework. According to sources with direct knowledge of the proceedings, Spencer directed his legal team to explore mechanisms for permanently removing Archie and Lilibet from the list of eligible beneficiaries across all applicable family trusts and honorary designations. These included not only financial benefits but also honorary entitlements, such as access to family properties, inclusion in family ceremonies, and recognition within historical family archives. The legal review began with a clause that had been dormant for decades, the Conduct Clause. This provision, embedded in the Spencer Trust documents, allowed trustees to exclude any descendant or family member whose behavior was deemed inconsistent with the values or preservation of the Spencer legacy. The clause had never been invoked before, not even in the case of distant relatives involved in scandals. But this situation was unique. The alleged photo shoot at Diana's grave was interpreted not just as bad taste but as reputational harm. The act, in Spencer's eyes, violated the very spirit of dignity and remembrance that the trust was designed to protect. And since the trust's purpose includes the careful management of Diana's memory, her archives, her charitable legacies, and her final resting place, the incident served as grounds for invoking the Conduct Clause. Once the clause was activated, legal procedures unfolded with clinical precision. Trustees gathered to review the events. Statements from Althorp staff were compiled. Copies of the images were added to the dossier. Lawyers from both sides argued over the legal implications of disinheritance based on reputational injury. In the end, Earl Spencer, backed by unanimous trustee agreement, moved to strike the names of Archie and Lilibet from any future distributions, recognitions, or ceremonial inclusions. The document that executed this move was signed, sealed, and stored in the Spencer family vault, a physical space at Althorp that holds generations of titles, land deeds, and personal letters. Alongside the document lies a detailed rationale, describing the reasons behind the exclusion. It cites the grave visit, the public dissemination of the images, and the absence of remorse or clarification from Meghan and Harry. The language is not vindictive, but firm. It is framed as an act of protection, not against the children themselves, but against the erosion of a sacred legacy. The legal implications are far-reaching. Under British law, once heirs are excluded from a dynastic trust, their removal is permanent unless the decision is reversed by the originating trustor or by unanimous trustee action. A virtually impossible occurrence without an extraordinary change in circumstance. In other words, barring legal challenge or personal intervention by Earl Spencer in the future, Archie and Lilibet are now permanently shut out. And this exclusion carries real consequences. They will not inherit property tied to the Spencer lands. They will not receive a share of the family's historical wealth. They will not be named in any ceremonial documents linked to Diana's memory. And perhaps most symbolically, they will not be offered a role in the future management or stewardship of Diana's legacy archives, collections that include her personal writings, speeches, and letters. This legal erasure was designed not to hurt, but to finalize. To put distance between a legacy of reverence and a media machine that, in Spencer's eyes, had grown far too invasive. The symbolism could not be clearer. Diana's memory is to be protected, not politicized. And those who choose to use it for public gain will find themselves outside the gates. As news of the inheritance exclusion spread quietly through high society, reactions were deeply divided. Some members of the nobility saw Spencer's move as courageous, a rare act of moral leadership in an era where family values often take a back seat to headlines. Others were more cautious, warning that punishing children for their parents' actions could backfire in the court of public opinion. But Spencer was unmoved by the optics. Those closest to him say he was prepared for the backlash. In fact, he anticipated it. But he also believed that the long-term preservation of the Spencer name required bold steps now, before the line between sincerity and spectacle vanished forever. There were personal costs, too. The exclusion of Harry's children meant an even deeper rift between Earl Spencer and his nephew. Though the two men had once shared a bond through grief, that bond had eroded over years of differing priorities. Spencer, the keeper of memory and honor. Harry, the rebel prince rebranding tradition through modern media. Their paths, once parallel in purpose, had now fully diverged. The children, of course, remained unaware of the storm swirling around their names. At their young ages, they could not comprehend what inheritance meant, or what it meant to be cut off from it. But one day they will. They will learn of the grave visit. They will see the images. They will read the op-eds. And they will discover that a decision made far from Montecito, in a quiet English estate, altered their connection to their grandmother's story forever. Supporters of Spencer argue that this is precisely why the exclusion was necessary. If children are to inherit a legacy, they must also inherit the responsibility to honor it. And if their parents demonstrate a repeated inability to protect that legacy, it becomes the duty of the wider family to act. It is a deeply painful paradox. Diana, the woman who fought to protect her children from institutional coldness, is now the reason why her grandchildren have been removed from the very family line that shares her name. But in Spencer's mind, this is not a betrayal of Diana, it is an act of devotion. He is not protecting the family from Diana's descendants. He is protecting Diana from what her image has become in their hands. What remains now is the silence. The long, unspoken acknowledgement that something has been broken. Not just ties, not just trust, but the very bridge between two generations of Diana's blood. It is a loss not visible in headlines, but in empty guest lists, in unopened archives, and in the absence of names once expected to lead the next chapter of the Spencer story. Long before Earl Spencer took the legal and symbolic step of severing Archie and Lilibet from the Spencer lineage, tensions had already been mounting for years. The gravesite scandal may have been the final act, but it was preceded by a trail of provocations, public, calculated, and, in many cases, incendiary. For those watching closely, the writing was already on the wall. Meghan and Harry were not just distancing themselves from royal tradition, they were actively reshaping the narrative of the monarchy, and often doing so by challenging, accusing, and at times, condemning it. What seemed to begin as a love story between a Hollywood actress and a British prince gradually transformed into a campaign of public discontent, media warfare, and reputational damage that reached every branch of Harry's family tree, including, eventually, the Spencers. The earliest signs of trouble began to emerge before the wedding even took place. Whispers from palace insiders revealed mounting friction between Meghan and royal staff, culminating in reports of bullying complaints that the palace would later investigate in secrecy. More than one aide described it demanding working environment, with staff quitting at a pace previously unseen. At the time, these reports were downplayed as exaggerated gossip, but the signs were there. Meghan was not adjusting to royal life in the traditional, submissive sense. She came with expectations, a vision, and a determination to bend royal life to fit her identity, not the other way around. Then came the royal wedding in May 2018, a globally televised event that radiated charm, diversity, and modernity. It appeared, at least for a moment, that the British monarchy had entered a new era. Meghan, elegant and Givenchy, walked down the aisle of St. George's Chapel with a grace that captured global hearts. Yet behind the scenes, rifts were widening. Just days before the wedding, reports emerged that Meghan had made Kate, the Princess of Wales, cry during a bridesmaid fitting for Princess Charlotte. The incident was never clarified by the palace, but when Meghan later claimed in an interview that the opposite had happened, that Kate made her cry and later apologized, it added fuel to a fire already burning in private royal chambers. From that moment forward, the Sussexes' path began to diverge more sharply from the rest of the royal family. The media narrative shifted from glowing admiration to relentless scrutiny. Meghan and Harry, rather than attempt to repair the narrative from within the palace walls, chose to confront it from the outside. Their decision to step back from royal duties in 2020, announced unilaterally via Instagram without the Queen's prior knowledge, marked a new chapter, the age of self-liberation. Branded by the media as Megxit, this departure wasn't just about changing jobs. It was a repudiation of an entire system. Meghan and Harry accused the institution of failing to protect them, emotionally abandoning Meghan during her mental health crisis, and tolerating racist narratives in the press. They traded palace halls for streaming platforms, pledging to tell their story in their own words. And those words were sharp. The most explosive expression of that narrative came in March 2021, during their 2-hour interview with Oprah Winfrey. Sitting beneath a California sun, Harry and Meghan unspooled a litany of grievances, claims of racist remarks made about Archie's skin tone, Meghan's isolation and suicidal ideation, and a total breakdown in communication with both Charles and William. The monarchy, for the first time in modern memory, was put on public trial by one of its own. The backlash was immediate. In the United Kingdom, trust in the Sussexes began to erode. Polls showed a sharp decline in public support for Harry, and an even steeper drop for Meghan. Royal defenders accused the couple of painting the institution in broad, unsubstantiated strokes. But none of this seemed to deter the Sussexes. If anything, it emboldened them. Their story became not just personal, it became a movement. A movement for justice, equity, and self-definition. In the months following the Oprah interview, the Sussexes launched a multimedia empire. They signed multi-million-dollar deals with Netflix, Spotify, and publishing houses. Each project was an opportunity to share their truth, a phrase Meghan often repeated, emphasizing the subjective nature of their claims. Their Netflix docuseries, Harry and Meghan, took this further, documenting their love story alongside a scathing critique of the royal media apparatus and the inner workings of the palace. Even Prince Harry's memoir, Spare, released in early 2023, read less like a royal biography and more like a manifesto. He laid bare decades of grievances, his rivalry with William, his resentment over being the spare to the heir, his drug use, therapy sessions, and memories of Diana's tragic death. He described altercations with his brother, cold exchanges with Charles, and feelings of deep abandonment. While the memoir sold millions of copies worldwide, it further cemented Harry's break from tradition. For many, Spare was a turning point, a definitive line between his royal past and his post-royal future. But perhaps most damaging were the repeated references to Diana. In every project, every interview, every stage moment, her name surfaced. Meghan compared her own suffering to Diana's. Harry blamed the paparazzi for both his mother's death and his own emotional turmoil. The imagery of Diana was not simply a point of reflection. It became a foundational element of their narrative architecture. Diana was positioned as the unheeded warning, the silenced victim, the royal family's greatest failure. And through that lens, Harry and Meghan portrayed themselves as the ones who broke the cycle. Yet this invocation of Diana struck a deep nerve with those closest to her, especially Earl Spencer. To Spencer, Diana's story was a private wound. Her legacy was not a commodity to be invoked whenever public sympathy was needed. Each time the Sussexes attached Diana's name to their projects or likened their pain to hers, the boundary between remembrance and appropriation became harder to define. One insider described Spencer's view this way: "It's one thing to remember your mother. It's another thing to build a brand around her ghost." The gravesite photoshoot, then, didn't occur in isolation. It was the culmination of a long pattern. One in which the Sussexes continually challenged royal norms while weaving Diana's image into their public identity. To their critics, this was exploitation. To their supporters, it was vindication. But to Spencer, it was the final confirmation that the couple was not capable of safeguarding the dignity of his sister's memory. There were other provocations, too. Meghan's accusations about unnamed royals discussing Archie's skin color triggered global headlines and widespread condemnation. Though she refused to name the individual, speculation tore through the palace. Every royal engagement afterward became a game of interpretation. Every facial expression, every word, every photograph viewed through the lens of suspicion. For a family built on diplomacy and subtlety, this was destabilizing at a foundational level. Then came the seemingly coordinated release of multiple media projects in rapid succession: the docuseries, the memoir, the podcasts. Each served as both content and condemnation, with the royal family often blindsided by the timing and narrative direction. At every turn, the Sussexes appeared to place their story above reconciliation, their narrative above family healing. This behavior became a pattern that not only alienated the royal family but also exhausted public goodwill. By the time the gravesite visit occurred, trust had evaporated. The Sussexes' credibility, at least among traditional circles, had withered beneath the weight of contradictions, overexposure, and an inability to separate genuine pain from curated presentation. To many within the aristocracy, this wasn't just rebellious behavior, it was sacrilege. The monarchy and the noble families that orbit it thrive on discretion, privacy, and quiet service. Public outbursts, tell-all exposés, and media manipulation are seen as violations of an unwritten code of honor. Meghan and Harry's repeated rejection of this code placed them outside not just the royal circle, but the cultural values that families like the Spencers hold dear. And so, when Earl Spencer finally acted, his decision was not sudden. It was the last page in a book of provocations that had started years before. The disinheritance of Archie and Lilibet wasn't merely about one photo shoot. It was about a consistent disregard for the boundaries of legacy, tradition, and restraint. The trail of trouble left behind by Meghan and Harry is not just a record of controversy, it's a story about modern identity crashing into ancient institution. It's about two people who, in seeking to control their story, dismantled the very bridges that once connected them to something greater than themselves. The public response to Earl Spencer's decision to formally exclude Archie and Lilibet from the Spencer inheritance ignited a firestorm of debate that swept across continents, cultural lines, and ideological divisions. As the news quietly rippled through legal and aristocratic circles before exploding into media headlines, the world quickly split into two sharply defined camps: those who hailed the move as a principled act of legacy protection, and those who condemned it as an act of collective punishment on innocent children. It wasn't just a royal family matter anymore. It became a global cultural flashpoint. In the United Kingdom, where traditional respect for the monarchy and its adjacent noble houses remains relatively strong, many in the public rallied behind Earl Spencer. Newspaper columns praised him for standing up to what they called the ongoing commercialization of grief. In letters to editors and opinion pieces in respected publications like The Telegraph, The Times, and The Spectator, readers wrote in agreement with the Earl's sentiment that Diana's name and memory had been used far too frequently as a rhetorical tool in the Sussexes' public campaigns. Commentators emphasized that the act of photographing and releasing images of a visit to Diana's gravesite, without Spencer's knowledge or consent, was more than a breach of etiquette. It was a deeply personal offense. This was not a shrine to be broadcast, one conservative commentator stated on a major British morning show. It was a resting place entrusted to her family, not a set piece for image rehabilitation. Some social media users in the UK went further, expressing outrage that the gravesite had been turned into, in their words, a PR weapon. Hashtags like #ProtectDiana's Legacy and #NotForClickbait began trending across British Twitter and Instagram. These posts weren't just critical of Meghan and Harry, they were emotionally charged, often accompanied by old images of Diana, appeals to honor her memory, and personal stories from those who had long admired the late Princess of Wales. Among royal watchers, particularly in the UK, Spencer's move was interpreted as the final confirmation that even Diana's own family had grown